You know how this is, Tanya. You told me yourself. You told your friends you were just kicking it until something more substantial came along. You said you couldn't handle the complications of a full-time commitment because your schedule is your own kingdom. I'm just respecting the boundaries you set. She leaned into him, letting the tension of the day dissolve against his chest. Maybe I was just protecting myself, she breathed. Maybe, he agreed, tilting her chin up. He bent down, and the world narrowed until there was nothing left but the warmth of his breath and the soft, lingering press of his lips against hers. It was a kiss that held the weight of 1,000 departures and the thrill of the next arrival. As they pulled apart, breathless and synchronized, Tanya looked at the clock on the mantel. The kids will be back in 10 minutes. I have a faucet in the laundry room that's been leaking in a very specific, annoying cadence. It sounds like someone tapping on a window in Morse code. I haven't been able to decipher what it's trying to say, and it's driving me mad. Blue laughed, a low, resonant vibration against her shoulder. A leaking faucet, huh? That's a new one. All right, lead the way. Let's go see if your plumbing has any secrets worth hearing. Scene 39. Flash and Munchkin's Logic Day. But if the light can't actually bend, Uncle Blue, why does the straw look like it's snapped in half inside my lemonade? Aiden asked, squinting at the glass with a mixture of suspicion and fascination. Uncle Blue sat cross-legged on the cool linoleum of the kitchen floor, a glass prism resting in his palm like a captured piece of the sun. He looked at the boy, his grin wide and infectious, before turning his gaze to Evelyn, who was vibrating with the same restless energy. That flash is the phantom of the physical world, Uncle Blue said, his voice dropping into that conspiratorial, rhythmic tone the kids lived for. You're seeing refraction. Light travels through the air at one speed and through the water at another. When it crosses that border, it stutters. It changes direction, trying to find the quickest path forward. Tanya stood by the counter, watching them. She was wearing a silk blouse the color of a bruised plum, her hair pinned up with a carelessness that suggested she'd spent the last hour meticulously crafting the look. She held a damp cloth, her eyes fixed not on the prism, but on the way Blue's hands, calloused and steady, demonstrated the concept by angling the glass against the afternoon sunbeam slicing through the kitchen window. She felt a familiar, sharp tug in her chest, a mixture of pride in the way her children leaned in, and a desperate, quiet hunger for the man sitting on her floor. Okay, kids, Tanya said, her voice steady but vibrating with a hidden frequency. It's time to move the operation. Your inventory project is waiting. I need every single can in the pantry sorted by expiration date, front to back, bottom to top. It's an exercise in temporal logistics. Chop chop. Aiden, or Flash, groaned good-naturedly, picking up his notebook while Evelyn Munchkin sighed with dramatic flair, though she was already marching toward the pantry door. They knew the drill. When Uncle Blue was in the house, the boring chores turned into high-stakes missions. As they rounded the corner into the pantry, the kitchen suddenly felt too large, the silence between Blue and Tanya stretching out like a wire pulled to the breaking point. Blue stood up, moving with a fluid grace that defied his size. He walked over to Tanya, pausing just inches away. He didn't rush. He let the silence hang, heavy and scented with the residual lemon of the cleaning spray she'd used earlier. You always did know how to clear the room, he murmured, his gaze dropping to her throat before catching her eyes again. I have a talent for efficiency, Tanya whispered, her composure slipping just enough to show the heat behind it. And you have a talent for disappearing right when I need you to stay. She didn't wait for him to bridge the remaining distance. She stepped into his space, grabbing the lapels of his jacket. The kiss was sudden, hungry, and deeply rooted in the complicated, shifting reality of their arrangement. It wasn't the tentative exploration of new lovers. It was the desperate, grounded collision of two people who knew exactly how limited their time together truly was. In the pantry, Aiden stacked a row of tomato soup cans, his brow furrowed in concentration. Do you think he actually knows how to build that community thing he keeps talking about? He whispered to his sister, his voice hushed. Evelyn didn't look up from a box of pasta, her small fingers tracing the printed dates on the cardboard. I don't think he knows how to do anything small, Flash. Have you seen the ledger he keeps in the hidden pocket of his bag? It's not just doodles, it's blueprints. Back in the kitchen, the air was still charged. Blue pulled back, his thumb tracing the line of Tanya's jaw. She looked at him, her eyes searching for a promise he'd never made. "Tanya," he said softly, his voice devoid of his usual performative swagger, "you know how this works. You told me the last time you're not looking for the weight of a forever. You're looking for the spark that keeps the room bright." Tanya let out a short, jagged breath. "I know what I said, Blue. That doesn't mean I don't feel the weight of the air when you leave." She smoothed his shirt, her touch lingering on his chest, feeling the steady, rhythmic thrum of his heart. "Just go help them finish the inventory. Don't make me do the expiration dates alone." Blue stepped toward the pantry, his expression shifting back to his signature, infectious energy. He leaned against the frame, watching the children work with a keen, almost clinical focus. "All right, team," he announced, his voice booming into the small closet. "What did we learn in school today? And don't you dare tell me nothing. A kid cannot have a good day in school if they don't learn a single thing." Evelyn looked up, her face bright. "We learned about the Roman aqueducts, Uncle Blue. They built these massive, slightly sloped stone channels to move water across entire valleys using nothing but gravity. If the slope was too steep, the water moved too fast and eroded the channel. If it was too shallow, the water stagnated and filled with silt. It had to be perfect, or the city wouldn't survive." Blue blinked, genuinely impressed. He'd taught them about fluid dynamics before, but he'd never framed it through the lens of ancient engineering. He knelt down next to them, his eyes wide. "That is fascinating. So the engineers were essentially balancing the force of nature against the needs of the people? They were architects of flow." "Exactly," Aiden chirped, beaming. "They had to account for the weight of the stone and the pressure of the water simultaneously." Blue sat back, nodding slowly. "That was great, and always remember, if you learn something new every day of your life, you won't even know 1% of what goes on in the universe, but you will be light years ahead of everyone else." He reached out and handed Aiden a small level tool from his pocket. "Use this to check the pantry shelves. If your structure is tilted, the logic fails and the cans fall. Everything from the light in the water to the water in the city is about balance. Now, let's see if we can get this inventory sorted with the precision of a Roman aqueduct." As the kids turned back to their task, laughing as they tried to align the cans with the bubble on the level, Blue caught Tanya's eye over their heads. She was leaning against the doorway, watching him with an expression that balanced on the edge of laughter and longing. She mouthed a single word, "Later," and turned toward the sink. The rhythm of her movements steadying the chaos of the afternoon into something that felt, for a fleeting moment, like a home. He looked at the cans, the children, and the woman who kept the gate, wondering how much longer he could keep the blueprints in his head and the life in his heart from colliding entirely. Scene 40. Alyssa and the kids bonding. "Why does the chalk turn to dust the moment you touch the pavement, but the pavement stays solid for 1,000 years?" Uncle Blue asked, his voice low and inquisitive. He was crouched on the sun-baked driveway of Alyssa's suburban home, holding a jagged piece of blue sidewalk chalk. Caleb, known to Uncle Blue as Rocco, stared at the driveway, squinting against the late afternoon glare. Beside him, Abigail, or Smudge as she was affectionately dubbed, bounced on her heels. "Because the stone is just harder than the chalk," Rocco said with a shrug, his brow furrowed in deep thought. "Right?" Uncle Blue shook his head, a playful smirk dancing on his lips as he flicked the chalk toward the hopscotch grid they had meticulously drawn. "Not quite, partner. It's all about molecular density and the binding energy of the minerals. The chalk is soft calcium carbonate, loosely packed. It's built to leave a trail, not to hold a structure. It wants to be everywhere, while the driveway, the concrete, is stubborn. It wants to stay exactly where it is." He stood up, dusting his hands on his trousers, and gestured to the chalk boxes. "Before we finish this game, tell me, what did you two learn in school today? And don't give me the nothing routine, because I know for a fact you can't have a good day if you don't grow your brain at least a little bit." Smudge chimed in first, her eyes bright. "We learned about the water cycle. We put a plant in a bag, and the water inside evaporated and then dripped back down like rain. Rocco nodded vigorously. And I learned that sound travels faster through water than through air because the molecules are closer together, so they bump into each other quicker. Uncle Blue looked at them, his expression shifting into one of genuine, quiet appreciation. He knelt back down, bringing himself to their eye level. That is fantastic, Rocco Smudge. And always remember, if you learn something new every day of your life, you won't even know 1% of what goes on in the universe, but you will be light years ahead of everyone else. He stood and clapped his hands together, the sound echoing off the garage door. Now, to master the physics of the perfect hop, it isn't just about jumping, it's about kinetic energy transfer. You have to push off with your toes, utilize your core, and land on the balls of your feet to absorb the shock. Watch. Uncle Blue demonstrated, moving with the fluidity of a dancer. He vaulted over the squares, his landing silent and controlled. For the next 20 minutes, the driveway was a symphony of laughter and calculated movement as he coached them through the geometry of their strides. Inside the kitchen, Alyssa watched from the window, her pulse quickening. She loved the way he looked with the kids, but a sharp, biting jealousy stung her. She had heard rumors from the other mothers in his rotation. She knew she wasn't his only stop, and the thought that someone else might be watching him teach their kids, watching him laugh that same infectious, throaty laugh, made her grip the edge of the granite counter until her knuckles turned white. When the kids finally took a break to grab juice, Alyssa stepped outside. She didn't say a word, just walked directly into his space. She was wearing a silk blouse that caught the breeze, her eyes searching his for any hint of deceit. "You're leaving soon, aren't you?" Alyssa asked, her voice tight, the subtext heavy with the fear of being replaced. Uncle Blue didn't look away. He closed the gap between them, his presence overwhelming. "I'm here now, Alyssa. That's what matters." "Is it?" she countered, her voice trembling. "Or am I just another box to check in your little ledger?" The argument flared instantly sharp, jagged words about commitment and the nature of their arrangement. Alyssa accused him of being a phantom, a man who gave everything to everyone and kept nothing for himself. Uncle Blue held his ground, his eyes burning with a rare, raw intensity as he countered that he was exactly who he told her he was from the very first night. But then, as if a switch had been flipped, the tension dissolved into a magnetic pull. He reached out, his hand tracing the line of her jaw with agonizing gentleness. The anger wasn't gone, but it had transformed into a desperate, silent understanding. He leaned in, and the kiss that followed was slow, deliberate, and fiercely passionate. It was a wordless apology and a promise for the next few hours, clean and absolute in its sincerity. They pulled apart, both breathless, their foreheads resting against one another. The world seemed to pause, the afternoon sun casting long, golden shadows across the driveway. Alyssa pulled back, regaining her composure with a sharp intake of breath. She looked toward the kids, who were currently wrestling with a stray soccer ball near the porch. She needed him to herself, and she needed a distraction that would keep the little ones occupied for the duration of the evening. "Rocco! Smudge!" she called out, her voice regaining its motherly authority. "I need your help. We've got a new vacuum cleaner in the closet, and it needs a full-scale test. I want you two to go through every single rug in this house and make sure there isn't a single speck of dust left anywhere. It's a high-stakes mission. Can you handle it?" "Yes, ma'am," they shouted in unison, already scrambling toward the mudroom. Once they were gone, the house suddenly felt cavernous and quiet. Alyssa turned back to Uncle Blue, a mischievous, determined spark in her eyes. "The kids are occupied with their mission," she whispered, her voice dropping to a low, intimate register. "And I have a very complicated situation with the master bedroom ceiling fan that requires an expert's attention. I think it's rattling in a way that only a master of kinetic energy could possibly resolve." Uncle Blue chuckled, the sound rich and warm. "I suppose I am the only man for the job." As they turned toward the house, the weight of their earlier argument hung in the air, but it had lost its teeth. They were balanced on the precipice of something deeper, even if they both knew the clock was ticking on his stay. He caught her hand, his fingers interlacing with hers. He wondered if she knew that his life, with all its stops and starts, was anchored by these moments, these brief, volatile, and profoundly human intersections. He wasn't just a visitor, he was a catalyst, and for as long as he remained, he intended to leave the world and the people in it a little bit more vibrant than he had found them. Scene 41. Rocco and Smudge learn physics. But if the wood isn't level, Uncle Blue, doesn't the whole experiment just slide into the dirt? Rocco asked, his brow furrowed as he wrestled with the heavy iron bolt of the garden seesaw. Uncle Blue laughed, a sound like gravel skidding on silk, and knelt down in the grass. He reached out, his long fingers steadying the boy's grip on the wrench. That's the beauty of it, Rocco. You see, when you're dealing with a liver, the imbalance isn't a failure, it's just a variable. It's an invitation to work harder. He's going to make us calculate the weight distribution, isn't he? Smudge whispered to her mother, her eyes wide with a mix of dread and excitement. Alyssa leaned against the sliding glass door, her arms folded, watching them from the shade of the patio. Her pulse was erratic, thrumming in her throat. She had been staring at the way Blue's shoulders shifted under his thin shirt, the way he occupied the space of her backyard like he owned the very concept of momentum. "He's going to make you learn, Smudge," she replied, her voice dropping an octave as her gaze locked with Blue's over the heads of her children. "And he isn't going to let you cut corners." Blue looked up, catching her stare. He didn't blink. He reached over and tapped the center point of the seesaw board with a calloused thumb. "Rocco, Smudge, listen close. Today we aren't just playing on a toy. We're talking about fulcrums. The fulcrum is the secret king of the playground. If you put the pivot point closer to you, you become stronger. If you move it away, you become faster. It's all about the exchange of energy." He stood up, dusted off his knees, and gestured toward the grass. "So, what did you learn in school today? And don't you dare say nothing, because if you didn't learn, you didn't have a good day." Smudge shifted on her feet, biting back a smile. "We learned about the water cycle, how the sun evaporates the water and it forms clouds and then comes back down as rain. It's a loop." Blue grinned, his eyes crinkling. "A closed-loop system powered by solar heat. That's brilliant. If you think about it, we're essentially drinking the same water the dinosaurs did millions of years ago. It's all recycled." He leaned in, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "That was great, and always remember, if you learn something new every day of your life, you won't even know 1% of what goes on in the universe, but you will be light years ahead of everyone else." As the kids scrambled onto the seesaw to test the weight ratios, Alyssa stepped onto the grass, the hem of her sundress brushing against the dew-slicked blades. She watched her children laughing, their tiny legs pumping, their voices shrill with delight. For a moment, the world felt too quiet, too still. She felt the heavy weight of her own yearning, the way she constantly checked the clock, the way she mapped out her days to ensure there was a gap just wide enough for him to fill. She wasn't looking for stability anymore. She was looking for this strange, kinetic friction. Blue moved toward her, his movements fluid, predator grace disguised as casual loitering. "They're getting tall, Alyssa," he said, standing close enough that she could smell the faint scent of cedar and ozone that always seemed to cling to him. "They're getting smart," she corrected, tilting her head. She reached out, her fingers ghosting over the fabric of his sleeve, feeling the heat radiating from his arm. "You have a way of waking them up. It's a dangerous gift." "I like to think of it as a necessary disturbance," Blue said. He leaned down, his lips brushing the shell of her ear. The world narrowed down to the space between them. For an instant, the sound of the children playing faded, replaced by the thrum of her own blood. He didn't wait for permission. He pulled her in, a firm, grounding motion, and kissed her with a hunger that felt like a quiet storm. It was intense, a brief, frantic collision of needs that left her breathless. When they pulled apart, her lungs felt like they were filled with smoke. She looked at him, her eyes searching his for some hint of permanence, but his expression remained as guarded as an encrypted file. "The kids are watching the clouds," she said, her voice husky. She stepped back, smoothing her dress, though her hands trembled. "We need to go inside, Blue. I've been worried about the structural integrity of the patio deck. It's been making some peculiar sounds under the weight of the furniture, and I'm afraid it's going to collapse if we don't inspect the joists underneath right now." Blue laughed, a low, rich sound that seemed to vibrate in the air around them. He cast a glance toward the deck, then back at her, his grin widening. "Structural integrity is everything, Alyssa. Lead the way." As she walked toward the house, she felt him trailing close behind, his presence a constant, heavy weight at her back. She didn't look back to see if the kids were still playing. She trusted the physics he had taught them, the balance he had insisted upon. She knew that for the next hour, the world was a closed loop and she was the only thing moving within it. The kids were still shouting about who was heavier, oblivious to the shift in the atmosphere. Rocco yelled, "I'm the fulcrum now, smudge!" And she shrieked in delight, but the sound was distant, muffled by the sudden rush of air as the screen door clicked shut behind them, sealing them into the quiet dark of the house. Everything was perfectly, dangerously in motion. Scene 42. Megan and the kids' arrival. The horizon was a jagged seam of violet and burnt orange, the kind of sky that whispered about change before the wind even began to stir. Uncle Blue sat in the driver's seat of his parked sedan, watching the mercury drop on the dash. He felt that familiar, kinetic hum in his chest, the transition from one life to another, a shift in frequency that required absolute presence. He tapped the steering wheel, his mind already drifting through the encrypted rows of his ledger, a digital sanctuary hidden behind layers of code, detailing every lesson taught to date. Today wasn't about the ledger, though. Today was about the wind. Inside the house, Megan was a whirlwind of controlled chaos. She stood in the mudroom, staring at a stack of plastic storage bins, her fingers twitching with the urge to organize. To anyone else, she was simply preparing for the seasonal shift. But to Megan, every label and every folded sweater was a bulwark against the entropy of her daily routine. She caught her reflection in the hallway mirror, smoothing her silk blouse, a sudden, sharp ache of anticipation tightening her ribs. She wasn't just waiting for help, she was waiting for the spark that made her house feel like a living, breathing thing. When the doorbell rang, the sound didn't just vibrate, it announced a shift in the atmosphere. Before Megan could even cross the floor, the front door burst open. "Uncle Blue!" Jackson screamed, his voice hitting a register of pure, unadulterated joy. "Uncle Blue, you're back!" Emily cheered, right on his heels, her eyes wide as she spotted the large, diamond-shaped package protruding from behind his back. Uncle Blue knelt, his movements fluid and purposeful. "Hey there, Spike. Hey there, Waffles. I heard the wind was picking up, so I thought it was high time we took advantage of the atmosphere." He pulled the kite from behind him, a vibrant, ripstop nylon beast in hues of electric blue and silver. Megan watched from the threshold of the kitchen, her arms folded, a small, knowing smile tugging at the corner of her mouth. She watched the way he handled the children, the effortless authority he possessed. He didn't talk down to them. He invited them into his world. "What did you two learn in school today?" Blue asked, standing up to meet Megan's gaze over the children's heads. "Nothing, just reading," Jackson said, tugging at the kite's tail. Blue shook his head, his expression turning mock serious. "Nothing? Spike? A man doesn't go to school to learn nothing. If you didn't learn a single thing, you didn't go to school. You just occupied a seat. What about you, Waffles?" Emily tilted her head. "We learned about wind currents, how the sun heats the earth unevenly, and the air moves from high pressure to low pressure to fill the gaps." Blue's face lit up, his grin wide and genuine. "Now that is a revelation. You see, the Earth is like a giant, unevenly heated engine, constantly trying to balance itself out. That kite isn't just a toy. It's an instrument for catching the kinetic energy of the planet itself." He paused, looking at them with intense focus. "That was great, and always remember, if you learn something new every day of your life, you won't even know 1% of what goes on in the universe, but you will be light years ahead of everyone else." He led them out to the backyard, where the grass was long and unruly. For the next hour, the house was silent, but the yard was alive with the sound of snapping nylon and the shouts of children learning to balance the kite against the invisible pull of the atmosphere. Blue taught them how to hold the line, feeling the tension, the push and pull of the air against the frame. Megan remained by the glass sliding door, watching. She noticed the way Jackson's posture shifted, becoming more confident, and how Emily's hesitation vanished the moment she felt the kite catch the lift. She realized then that Blue didn't just visit, he recalibrated them. He made the world feel tactile, reachable. As the sun began to dip below the neighbor's fence, casting long, dramatic shadows across the grass, Blue signaled for a break. He walked back toward the porch, his hair wind-tossed and his eyes bright with the residual energy of the lesson. The children scrambled inside to fetch the special treat, a stack of paper bags from the local burger joint, the grease already smelling like victory. "They're exhausted," Megan said as he stepped onto the deck, the screen door clicking shut behind the kids. "They're learning," Blue corrected, stepping into her space. He moved with a deliberate, slow intensity that stripped away the pretense of the afternoon. Megan didn't step back. The air between them was heavy, charged with the same pressure difference he had just been teaching the kids about. "I have a mountain of winter gear in the attic that needs sorting," she murmured, her voice losing its edge, becoming soft, melodic. "It's a complicated mess. I have no idea how to categorize the transition from autumn to deep winter without a complete system failure." Blue smiled, a slow, dangerous curve of his lips. "Sounds like a problem that requires an expert set of hands." He reached out, his fingers tracing the line of her jaw, his touch light but insistent. The world around them, the cooling grass, the distant hum of traffic, faded into a dull roar. Megan leaned into his palm, closing her eyes as the anticipation crested. When he kissed her, it wasn't a tentative greeting, it was a firm, grounding anchor. It felt like the sudden lift of the kite, an exhilarating, terrifying release from the gravity of her own expectations. She caught her breath, her hands resting firmly on his shoulders, feeling the solid, unshakable reality of him. It was a kiss that tasted of the crisp evening air and the promise of a night where the only thing that mattered was the space they occupied together. "Go," she whispered against his lips, breathless but laughing quietly. "The kids are waiting, and I need to deal with these winter bins. There's a secret about the family recipe for hot cocoa that I'm dying for you to help me decode before the sun is fully down." Blue gave her one last lingering look, his eyes dark with intent. "I'll be there in 10. As he walked back to the children, Megan stood on the porch, her heart hammering against her ribs like a bird in a cage. She knew the arrangement, she knew the fragility of his presence, but as she watched him laugh at something Jackson said, she realized she no longer cared about the predictability she had spent years chasing. For now, the wind was blowing, and she was finally, dangerously, in flight. Scene 43. Spike and Waffle's Discoveries. The morning light hit the kitchen of Megan's house in sharp, geometric shards, catching the fine layer of flour dust Megan had neglected to wipe from the counter after yesterday's baking project. It smelled faintly of vanilla and ozone, the scent of a home that was lived in hard. Outside, the world was a dull gray, but inside, the air felt charged, humming with the kind of kinetic energy that only followed Uncle Blue's truck pulling into the driveway. Megan watched from the hallway, leaning against the doorframe, her posture relaxed but her eyes tracking every one of Blue's movements with an intensity that bordered on hunger. She had traded her usual corporate attire for a soft, oversized silk blouse that slipped just enough off one shoulder to be deliberate. She watched him walk into the living room, a duffel bag slung over his shoulder, and felt that familiar, dangerous flutter in her chest. In the center of the living room rug, Jackson, whom Blue immediately dubbed Spike, and Emily, known to him as Waffles, were already bouncing on their heels. The living room had been transformed into a temporary physics laboratory. Blue didn't just walk into a house, he colonized it with curiosity. "All right, you two," Blue said, his voice smooth and resonant, cutting through the morning stillness. He reached into his pocket and pulled out 2 crisp, silver dollar-sized coins. He knelt on the floor, his movements fluid and precise, mirroring the energy of a man who spent his life in motion. "Today, we aren't just playing. We're defying gravity. Or at least we're keeping it occupied." Megan retreated to the kitchen island, busying herself with a stack of mail she'd already read a dozen times, though her ears were tuned entirely to the living room. She watched Spike, her son, try to balance his coin on its edge. It wobbled and fell with a dull metallic clink. "It's impossible, Uncle Blue," Spike complained, his brow furrowed in that way that made him look exactly like his father. "It's not impossible, it's just busy," Blue replied, placing his own coin on the floor. He flicked it with his thumb, and it began to spin, a blur of silver, vibrating with high-frequency energy. "Watch the axis. See how it stays upright as long as it has velocity? That's angular momentum. The spin creates a rigid stability, forcing the object to resist falling over. It's a physical manifestation of a persistent thought." Waffles leaned in, her small hands hovering near the spinning coin, mesmerized. "So if I spin it faster, it stays up longer?" "Exactly," Blue said, his eyes bright with a sharp, intellectual fire. "The faster the rotation, the more it demands the universe let it be. It's physics, Waffles. It's the art of staying centered while everything else tries to knock you down." Megan stepped closer, her heart rhythm matching the steady hum of the spinning coins. She caught Blue's gaze over the kids' heads. He didn't look away, nor did he smile. He held her glance with a lingering, heavy silence that made the skin on her arms prickle. "Hey, Spike Waffles," Megan interrupted, her voice steady despite the sudden spike in her pulse. "Why don't you two take those coins into the dining room? See if you can get them to spin on the glass table. I want to see if the surface texture changes the friction coefficient." The kids sprinted off, shouting about potential experiments, leaving the living room suddenly, suffocatingly quiet. Blue stood up, wiping his hands on his denim jeans. He walked toward the kitchen, his gaze fixed on Megan, his jaw set with a quiet, masculine focus that she found entirely too distracting. He didn't offer a platitude. He didn't offer a compliment on her appearance. He simply crossed the space between them, his presence consuming the room, until he was standing close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from him. "You look tired, Megan," he murmured, his voice dropping into a register that felt like a secret meant only for her. "I'm exhausted," she whispered, her hands gripping the edge of the marble island. "The world doesn't stop, and I feel like I'm trying to balance 1,000 spinning coins all at once." "Then let me take one off your hands," he said. He reached out, his fingers grazing the skin of her neck as he tucked a stray lock of hair behind her ear. Megan turned, stepping into him, abandoning the pretense of the male. She leaned up, her breath hitching as he leaned down. The kiss was slow, deliberate, and tasted like the promise of something forbidden. It wasn't a tentative exploration. It was a reclamation of the space they had carved out for themselves in the middle of a chaotic life. His hands settled firmly on her waist, pulling her flush against him, and for a moment the room seemed to tilt on its axis, held steady only by the pressure of his touch. It was an emotional crescendo, a sudden alignment of two erratic, independent forces finally finding a shared rhythm. He pulled back just enough to look at her, his eyes dark and questioning. Megan reached over and grabbed the tangled, digital alarm clock from the counter, the one she had been obsessing over for 3 days, the one that refused to sync with the network. "The clock is broken, Blue," she said, her voice husky. "It's completely impossible to figure out." Blue took the device from her hands, his thumb brushing against her knuckles. "Nothing is impossible. We just need to find the right frequency." As they retreated toward the quiet sanctuary of the hallway, Megan felt the lingering thrill of his touch, a silent reminder that for the next few days, the world outside was irrelevant. She knew they were drifting, two ships in a vast, indifferent ocean, but as she closed the door behind them, she couldn't help but wonder if stability was overrated when compared to the exhilaration of being truly, completely seen. "You know," he murmured, glancing back at the closed door before turning to the task at hand. "If you learn something new every day of your life, you won't even know 1% of what goes on in the universe, but you will be light years ahead of everyone else." Scene 44, Kendra and the final roster. The backyard of Kendra's home was a manicured oasis of Kentucky bluegrass, now serving as the battleground for a high-stakes game of backyard croquet. Uncle Blue stood near the back porch, his sleeves rolled to his elbows, demonstrating the perfect grip on a wooden mallet. Mateo, whom Blue called Twister, and Elizabeth, whom he called Doodle, watched with rapt attention. Their mother, Kendra, stood by the sliding glass door, wearing a floral sundress that moved with the late afternoon breeze. Her eyes traced the line of Blue's shoulders as he shifted his weight, testing the stability of the turf. Now, the trick to a perfect strike isn't just power, Blue said, his voice rhythmic and calm. It's about the pendulum motion. You align your target, lock your core, and let the wood do the work. If you force it, you lose the precision. Mateo gripped his mallet, his knuckles white with focus. Like this, Uncle Blue? He swung, the mallet head connecting squarely with the yellow ball. It rolled with satisfying speed through the first wire hoop. Perfect, Twister, Blue cheered, clapping his hands. You see that? That's what we call kinetic transfer. The energy from your arm went straight into the wood, and the wood passed it to the ball. Physics is just a series of handshakes between objects. Kendra stepped off the porch, her movements fluid and deliberate. She walked over, resting a hand briefly on Blue's arm as she passed to reach the drinks cooler. Her skin felt electric against his, and Blue felt his own pulse hitch. She didn't let go immediately, her fingers lingering on the fabric of his shirt before she withdrew. They're doing well, Kendra noted, her voice low. You've got them actually thinking about the mechanics of the game instead of just swinging wildly. They're bright kids, Kendra, Blue replied, keeping his tone casual for the benefit of the children. It's easy to teach when the foundation is solid. Elizabeth, or Doodle, tilted her head at the mallet in her hand. Uncle Blue, why does the ball stop eventually? If it's just a handshake, why don't they keep going forever? Blue crouched down to her level, ignoring the heat radiating from Kendra just inches away. That's a brilliant question, Doodle. It's because of friction. The grass, the air, even the microscopic bumps on the dirt, they're all working to pull that energy away. In a perfect empty void, that ball would travel until it hit a star. But here, the world is full of resistance. That's what we live in. So, the world is trying to stop us? Elizabeth asked, her brow furrowed in genuine contemplation. It's not trying, Blue smiled, tapping her nose lightly. It's just participating. That was great, and always remember, if you learn something new every day of your life, you won't even know 1% of what goes on in the universe, but you will be light years ahead of everyone else. Kendra watched them, a small, knowing smile playing on her lips. She felt the weight of her own daily routine, the endless emails, the mounting utility bills, the quiet, aching predictability of her schedule, suddenly feel thinner, like a veil ready to tear. She looked at Mateo and Elizabeth, who were now engaged in a debate over whose ball was closest to the stake. You two, Kendra said, her voice commanding but playful. I think the shed needs attention. It's a mess of disorganized hardware. I want you to go out there and sort every single tool by size, from smallest wrench to the biggest rake. If you get it finished before dinner, we'll do an ice cream run. The kids groaned in unison, but the mention of ice cream was enough to send them scurrying toward the back shed, their laughter trailing behind them. Once they were safely out of earshot, the air in the garden seemed to thicken. Kendra turned to Blue, the skepticism that usually guarded her expression giving way to a raw, undeniable hunger. She didn't say a word. She simply closed the gap between them, her hands coming up to rest on his lapels. Blue leaned down, his focus shifting entirely to her. You're making it very hard to concentrate on the game, Kendra, he whispered, his voice losing its playful edge for something deeper. The game is over, she replied, tilting her chin up. She kissed him then, a swift, searing press of lips that spoke of long, solitary nights and the thrill of the unexpected. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was an anchor, a claim, a defiance of the vacuum of her daily life. Blue pulled her closer, his hands framing her face, and for a heartbeat, the world stopped moving. The friction of their lives effectively neutralized. When they broke apart, Kendra was breathless, her eyes searching his for a sign that he understood the gravity of what she felt. She reached out, tracing the line of his jaw. I know what you say about the arrangement, Blue. I know you think this is what I want. Something fleeting, something safe because it's temporary. You keep telling me it's because of my trust issues or that I'm just kicking it until something more stable comes along. Blue looked at her, his expression unreadable, though his eyes burned with a soft intensity. He took her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. You're the one who keeps drawing the lines, Kendra, and I'm just walking the path you've cleared. Maybe I'm tired of the path, she countered, though her voice remained steady. But for now, the shed needs sorting, and I have a mysterious, overly complicated kitchen faucet that seems to have a mind of its own. It's a real puzzle, one that requires an expert to decipher." Blue chuckled, a low, resonant sound that eased the tension in the air. "I think I can handle a plumbing mystery. It's all just physics, after all." As they walked toward the house, the sun dipped lower, casting long golden shadows across the grass. Kendra looked back at the shed, then at the man beside her. She knew that in 3 days he would be gone, and the silence would return. But as she felt his hand slip into hers, she decided that perhaps the temporary nature of things was the only thing that made them worth holding on to. The mystery of the faucet was just an excuse, a thin piece of paper covering a cavernous, thrilling void of possibility that she was finally ready to jump into. Scene 47. Turbo and Spark Plug's Science. The living room of Rachel's home smelled faintly of toasted cinnamon and the metallic tang of an open toolbox. Uncle Blue sat cross-legged on the hardwood floor, a high-intensity LED flashlight disassembled into its base components across a microfiber cloth. Beside him, Leo, known as Turbo, and Mia, whom he called Spark Plug, leaned in so close their noses almost touched the springs and circuit boards. "And you're absolutely certain the light just appears?" Uncle Blue asked, his voice low and conspiratorial, the kind of tone that usually preceded a magic trick or a revelation about the universe. He didn't look up, his fingers steady as he balanced a tiny copper contact point. Leo didn't blink. "It comes from the battery, Uncle Blue. Like the energy is trapped inside, and when we flip the switch, it gets set free to run through the wire." Uncle Blue paused, the silence in the room stretching until it felt like a physical weight. He slowly raised his head, locking eyes with Leo. "Trapped? That's a poetic way to look at it, Turbo, but let's see if we can make it more than just poetry." Across the room, Rachel leaned against the kitchen island, a glass of water forgotten in her hand. She watched them, her posture relaxed, though her eyes tracked every move Uncle Blue made. She felt a familiar, sharp tug in her chest, the way he commanded the room without raising his voice, the way he turned a rainy Tuesday into an expedition of the mind. She wondered, as she often did, if he knew exactly how much space he occupied in her periphery. "Mia," Uncle Blue said, his gaze shifting to the younger child, "what did you learn in school today?" Mia tilted her head, her brow furrowed in concentration. "We talked about the Roman aqueducts. The teacher said they used gravity to move water over miles. They didn't have pumps like we do." Uncle Blue tapped the battery casing against the floor. "See, that's the thing. Nothing is ever just good, or nothing, when you're looking at how the world stays upright. If you learn something new every day of your life, you won't even know 1% of what goes on in the universe, but you will be light years ahead of everyone else." He turned back to the task at hand. "Now, watch this." He held the small LED bulb and connected it directly to the terminals with a jumper wire he'd stripped from an old hobby kit. The light flared to life, a sharp, brilliant white. That's the path of least resistance. Current is just like you two, it wants to get home as fast as possible. If you give it a shortcut, it'll take it every time. "It's like racing," Leo whispered, his eyes wide. "Exactly," Uncle Blue grinned. "Life is about building the best tracks." Rachel set her glass down with a soft clink and walked over, moving with a deliberate grace. She knelt beside them, the scent of her floral perfume momentarily displacing the metallic smell of the tools. She watched the light flicker in the children's hands. "You have a way of making the mundane look like a grand discovery, Blue," she said, her voice dropping into a register meant only for him. "It's all about perspective, Rachel," he murmured, his eyes lingering on her for a heartbeat longer than necessary before he turned back to the assembly. "Ready to finish this, kids? We're going to rig this to a pressure sensor next. If we get the spring tension right, it'll turn on every time you step on the floorboard near your rooms." "An alarm," Leo cheered. "A pathfinder," Uncle Blue corrected, winking. The children spent the next 20 minutes caught in the fervor of the construction, their laughter bubbling up as they tested the pressure sensitivity. Rachel observed from the sofa now, her hand resting on a throw pillow, her mind drifting from the technical diagrams to the way Blue's hands moved, precise, rhythmic, capable. She didn't mind the chaos of wires and tools. It felt, for the first time in a long time, like the house was actually alive. As the late afternoon light turned a deep, bruised purple outside the window, Rachel stood up. Leo, Mia, go finish those history flashcards in the den. I need to handle some maintenance with your uncle. The kids grumbled, but they knew the drill. They scooped up the remaining parts and scurried off, the promise of a celebratory pizza dinner already making them forget their disappointment. Once the hallway door clicked shut, the silence returned, sharper than before. Uncle Blue stood up and brushed the dust from his jeans. He didn't rush, but the air between them grew taut. Rachel stepped toward him, the space between them closing until he could see the slight flush on her cheeks. "The house is getting too quiet," she whispered, her hands resting briefly on his shoulders. She moved closer, the challenge in her eyes softening into something more urgent. He reached out, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw, a gesture that spoke of intimacy and a profound, wordless understanding. He leaned in, and the kiss was slow, deliberate, a brief surrender before the rest of the world caught up to them. She pulled back just an inch, her breath catching. "The thermostat," she said, her voice steady despite the flutter in her pulse. "It's been acting up, and I have a feeling we need to adjust the settings for the entire week. It's going to be a very long, very complicated process." Uncle Blue looked at her, a wry, knowing smile playing on his lips. He knew exactly what she meant by adjusting the settings. "I'm a specialist, Rachel. I think I can find the right balance." She leaned her forehead against his, a quiet, humming tension grounding them both. "Good," she murmured, "because I don't think I can handle another night of things feeling so out of place." The end.